just want to take this moment to say thank you. It is a delight to have this opportunity to be able to address and to speak with this body. And we welcome you to Chicago. All of the wonderful things that happen in this city and all the challenges that are before us in this city. But we are excited about the work that is happening with this caucus. I believe that there is a movement afoot across this nation as a result of a new level of consciousness and spirit, where people are doing some incredible work from whether it is in Maine or California, in the South or in the North, and it is an absolute delight to have this opportunity to be with you. And I want to just the time that we have this moment to lift up something I think that will be valuable as you all serve in your respective communities, especially in this particular climate that we find ourselves in. And I want to lift up, I know we're not in church, but I want to lift up a passage of scripture that I think will be appropriate, that I want to illuminate at this moment, coming from Daniel, the 3rd chapter. Very familiar passage and familiar story to those who are familiar with Sunday school. But the 3rd chapter in Daniel, in the 16th verse, reads this way from the New International Version. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And God will deliver us from your hand, Majesty, because you have term limits. But even if God does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. We know that our God is able, but even if God does not, we will not bow down to you. I want to just focus on this idea of even if. Even if. The nation today, the nation called America, by citizens of these yet-to-be United States of America, we are in a new phase of a moral crisis. A moral crisis is the correct term, Mr. Rollins, because it's not solely an economic crisis, it's not a social or political crisis, but we face a moral reckoning as a nation. Our economic future is not based on manufacturing or market fluctuations, our stocks or derivatives or any of these things, but our educational system, success or failure, all of our policy is rooted in our moral courage and our moral imagination. That the very fabric of our community and the future of our children is cast within the moral framework of our character and our courage. If we do not take hold of this moment, if we do not do what we are being called to do in order to fashion a new future, then our children and our children's children will say that we are saboteurs of their own future.
That's right. Yeah.
This is a moral crisis. And we face this particular moment. What people shall we be? What shall we do in this moment? Shall we cower or shall we stand and speak with authority rooted in love and in justice? Shall we be faithful, courageous, unrelenting voices of justice, smothered in a spiritual seasoning of love, or shall we retreat and simply hide behind our screens with outrage but with no action? America is at a crossroad. We, as the people of faith, we must be the repairers of the breach so that we may prepare for a generation that is not yet been born.
That's right.
And that we are called to contribute to this, not sit back.
That's
We're
right.
called to contribute,
That's
to
right.
build a yet-to-be United States of America.
Yes.
This is a moral crisis. And I believe that history and the holy give us an understanding of how to deal with this particular moment. But I have to be very honest with you as we gather here, is that I'm also disturbed by this particular moment. It's not a couple of weeks ago. There were some people who decided that they were going to make their way to the White House. Many of them had some letters in front of their name. Reverend, Doctor, Bishop, Apostle, or whatever. Whatever. Decided to gather and have a meeting with the President of the United States of America. They were called to this meeting by an evangelist, an evangelical by the name of Paula White. She gathered all of these mostly men of color. And Paula White, as some of you may not know, is one who rose to prominence because she could utilize black rhetorical flourishes as she spoke before multiracial crowds. And so this gathering, ministers, and I will not mention their name, but all of them had a television or televangelist platform, but no justice agenda. There's a problem when you have a platform, but you do not have an agenda for those people who are marginalized in this community. And as they gathered before the current president, there was even one who made such an outrageous claim and said he was the most pro-black president in history. I must say this gentleman was from Cleveland, where I grew up, so I apologize for anything that he ever said. Immediately, about 30 minutes after this statement was made, a friend of mine by the name of Frederick Douglass Haynes sent me a note and said that we have to respond to this. Otherwise, people will think that this is the tradition of the black church. Because there are some people who have black people in their church, but it's not a black church because it does not have a black agenda. So 30 of us signed this particular letter, and we were trying to make sure that the media understood that this was not the defining moment for the black religious tradition. And in this particular moment, we raised a particular question that how could someone make the statement that this was the most pro-black president in history? And the question that we had to raise was he being pro-black when he raised the question of President Obama, are you really a citizen of the United States of America? Was he being pro-black when he cussed out NFL players because they took a non-violent knee as they were protesting police brutality? Was he being pro-black when he equivocated between those white supremacists on one side and those who were protesters on the other side? Was he being pro-black when he appointed Jeff Sessions, who has been rolling back every specific progressive criminal reform that we have seen in the last 10 years? No, we do not see someone who is pro-black, but we do see some anti-black, xenophobic, insecure, and moral ambiguity that is coming from this particular White House. It is a challenge that we face today. That it is a role, especially for those people of faith, that we are not here specifically to stand before those in power and simply caress their back. That we are to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. This is the particular role. And I'm reminded that out of the tradition within the African American church, there has always been what is called a prophetic tradition. The prophetic tradition of those who are willing to speak truth to power in the face of those who may be powerful but do not want to hear the truth. You've heard the names before. Names such as Martin Luther King Jr., names such as Septima Clark and Fannie Lou Hamer, names such as Adam Clayton Powell, names such as Samuel DeWitt Proctor. You've heard these names before. But there is a person that I want to lift up that is probably one of the most prophetic individuals within the 19th century who was able to speak truth to power, a person by the name of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, it was about 12 years, I believe, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Those who had been kissed by nature's son, who had been formerly enslaved, gathered their pennies and together, and they built and they funded a particular statue in honor of Abraham Lincoln. And they invited Frederick Douglass, Republicans and Democrats, even a few Whigs were hanging out around at that time, brought him together and said, we want you to speak before us about Abraham Lincoln. Here is Frederick Douglass, minister, former slave, speaking to an audience that is primarily white, that still did not think that he had the intellectual capacity to be able to speak to people who were from Europe. And
there he was standing before them, and Frederick Douglass said something so powerful where he said, and I quote, "Truth is proper and beautiful at all times. And in all places it is never more proper when speaking of a great public man." He was preeminently, he says about Lincoln, he was preeminently, yes, a great president for you. He was preeminently the white man's president. Entirely devoted to the welfare of the white man. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best his stepchildren, his adopted children, or children that have been forced by circumstance. Here he is in 1876, able to speak truth to power. And I raise the question, what is our problem in 2018? That if Frederick Douglass could do it a few years outside of emancipation, where is our voice in this moment so that we are able to speak truth to power? If Frederick can do it, then we can do it also. Frederick Douglass spoke for power. That is part of the role that one is placed in a position so that you can speak not only truth to power, but you must speak for those who have no voice. There are people across this nation who do not have the money for a lobbyist firm to come to Washington, D.C. There are people across this nation whose voices shall never be heard, and you shall be their voice. But be careful when you decide to be the voice of the people that you are always listening to them, but not be swayed by the seduction of power that will tell you you need to compromise your voice. We are called to set the captive free. So in this particular text that I've lifted up, where this text from the Old Testament of Daniel, this prophetic text, it speaks, I believe, that if we begin to study from the ancient perspective, we can have some understanding about the politics of now. Yeah. That an ancient Babylon gives us an understanding of a present Babylonian-esque situation. And so we see here that there's a gentleman by the name of King Nebuchadnezzar. He is a colonizer. He is a colonizer of Israel and of the Hebrews. He has people who are living in exile. It's an unfriendly administration to those who are of Hebrew origin. He is the king, and he captures 4 young men. One by the name of Daniel, another by the name of Hananiah, another by the name of Mishael, another by the name of Azariah. But then he changes their names. Because he does not want them to know who they are or whose they are. And so Daniel becomes Belshazzar, Hananiah becomes Shadrach, and Mishael becomes Meshach, and Azariah becomes Abednego. He says, I've got to change your name to a Babylonian name. I'm not going to use your proper name. I'm going to call you out of your name because I don't really want you to understand who you are. And so it is in this text that if you read from chapter 1 to 3, the king attempts to get them to sit at his table and eat his food. But I've got to give major props to a brother by the name of Daniel. He said, you can eat whatever you want. I will sit at your table, but I will not eat what you serve. Because I've got my own diet. I still have my integrity, even though I'm sitting at your table. Yes, it was Daniel who understood that the only reason that we are at your table is we're only at the table because there are 3 things that you recognize about our particular Israelite bodies. That you want our bodies for your production. In other words, you want our labor, but you don't want our intellect. You want to utilize us so that you can promote the welfare of your particular derivatives that you've invested in the stock market, but you do not want to hear what we have to contribute in reference to your administration. So there is the production aspect, but there's also the promotion aspect, that I want to utilize these young men to promote my agenda. I want to parade you around so they will think that I am pro-Hebrew, but in actuality I don't like Hebrews because I want to use your production for my own personal well-being. And so there is production and there is promotion, but then there is propaganda, because you understand that Nebuchadnezzar understands how to use propaganda by taking these young men and parading them around Israel and saying that I'm for the Israelites. So we have production and we have promotion and we have propaganda dealing with these young men. But here is where you have economy and theology moving together. If you read this thing, it'll mess you up, because those of you who know the story, it is Nebuchadnezzar who says, I've got to build a tower. I'm sorry, it is Nebuchadnezzar who says, I've got to build a gold statue. If you notice, the structure of the statue is built like a skyscraper. He's building a gold statue, and everybody is to bow down so that they can see the name of Nebuchadnezzar on the statue, because he has some insecurities about who he is, so he has to let everybody know that I'm all right. And so he invests his money in building this particular statue. And this is where one scholar says the economy and the theology merge at this particular moment. One scholar puts it this way, that he wants the people to bow down to the gold, to bow down to the material, to believe that their ultimate concern, that their God is actually the material. That if you begin to bow down to the merchandise, begin to bow down to this thing that is utilized for currency, that you will begin to understand that this is where the real source of power comes from, the medium of exchange. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar was involved in what I would call ancient prosperity theology. That if you bow down to the gold, that everything will be all right in your life. And that is part of the problem, not only with the church, but also in politics, that we have a framing that is solely focused around the economic, but not focused around that which is moral. We are more concerned about the stock market than those who have no stock in the market. And we are not concerned about those who are on the margins of society. And so there's a merging of economy and theology within this text. But here is the thing of how there is resistance in this text. It is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And where they find themselves in the midst of this particular king. And the king gives out an edict in order to simply say that everybody is to bow down to the tower that I built. The tower that I built with the nation's funds in order to fund myself so that I will have more money. Everybody's got to bow down to this particular tower. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, you know what, everybody can bow down, but I want you to know, we ain't doing it. Come on now. You can bow down if you want to, but we are not going to bow down because we have integrity, and there's a value system that we operate under. Let me say it this way. You see, what they utilize is sacred subversion in the face of unholy seduction. That you have to understand that when you are in the face of unholy seduction, that sometimes you need some sacred subversion. What is sacred subversion? That says that I would rather die in truth and with integrity than live my life in a disgrace. That I would rather speak truth to power than allow myself to be seduced by a value system that will not bless my children and my children's children. I would rather live in exile than live in the king's house, because I would rather live in a tent than a palace that has no integrity. And so they are willing to say that I will offer sacred subversion. And I saw sacred subversion in a unique way, especially in the face of unholy seduction a few weeks ago. There's a gentleman from Cleveland that I love, not the one who said the president is Flo Bragg, but there's a gentleman from Cleveland I love. I grew up in Cleveland, I live in Chicago, and there's a brother I love, but my estimation of this brother went up several levels when I saw what he said and what he has done. There's a brother by the name of LeBron James. Great respect for LeBron James. LeBron James took his money, gave $30 million for those young people at the Boys and Girls Club, that anyone who goes to the University of Akron will go there for free. He built a school, the I Promise School, starting in 2nd and 3rd grade with wrap-around services to ensure that any young person who comes out of this school will have the necessary resources to succeed in life. LeBron is doing it on the court. LeBron is doing it off the court. But then Don Lemon raised a question to LeBron James and asked him, there's been some dust-ups with you and the president. Would you sit down with him? And LeBron, in LeBron fashion, said, I wouldn't sit across the table from him. It's amazing to me that an athlete has more integrity than some preachers. So then, in typical fashion, the person who is president now then decides to tweet an attack on black intellect, and says to Don Lemon, saying the dumbest of all of people who are reporters on television. And then, after that, then says he made LeBron look smart, which is hard to do. And then tried to clap back and throw some shade by saying, I like Mike. But what he didn't know is that Mike had already tweeted to say that I was LeBron. So we see that in the face of unholy seduction, that we must have a form of subversion. Because these Hebrew boys, they simply say that you can throw us in the furnace. Yes, but if you do, we're still not going to bow down to you. Because we know that our God is able. But even if God doesn't do it, we're still not going to bow down to you. Because our relationship with God is not based on what God has done. Our relationship is simply rooted in such a way where we have and recognize a value system that we are willing to live under. And so what I love that these three Hebrew boys do is that it's three Hebrew boys who are standing together, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In other words, what they do in the face of this Babylonian moment, they build radical relationships when faced with reprehensible leadership. You see, it's three of them working together. It's not one standing before the king, it's three standing before the king. And each of them are from different tribes. You completely miss this. They come from a different area and background, but they're willing to build a coalition together, recognizing that we do more together than we can apart. And this is part of the great challenge for us, that we must be willing to build coalitions together. I received some major criticism at my home church. When one Sunday, I took out an entire Sunday to talk about the challenges at the border. And there was somebody who came to me and said, why, Moss, are you talking about children on the border? You talk about black children, black. I said, hold up, wait a minute. Let me break it down to you first of all. You need to understand that all children are our children, number one. Number two, if they come for children at the border today, they're coming for your child tomorrow. That you've got to build a coalition with each other. And this has been the tradition within the African American tradition, that we have been building coalitions since the day we arrived here. Don't you know, for those who are from Louisiana, that there is a coalition between those of African descent and those who are indigenous Americans, that when you landed on indigenous soil, you were considered a free person. And that is why in New Orleans every year, during what is called that great celebration in February, they have Indians, black Indians, that come out and celebrate to acknowledge the coalition that has been between people of African descent and those of indigenous first world people in this nation. We can do more together than we can apart. That is why I love being a part of a great group in New York, the Auburn Seminary. They have a fellowship, fellows group. They have brought together some people from the black church tradition, myself and Bishop Flunder and William Barber and Raphael Warnock and Jackie Lewis and Michael Ray Matthews. There we are, we're from the black church tradition, but they pair us with people who are Muslim and Sikh and who are Native American and those who are Jewish, because we recognize that we can do more together, that we are not bound particularly by our traditions, but when we come together, we know that we are all God's children, and by that recognition, we have the ability to be able to speak truly truth to power. And so we see here in this text that yes, they were doing this to subvert some things in the face of unholy seduction. They were building radical relationships, but you must see something that's so beautiful, especially for those who are English teachers. They are able to modify their moment with holy hope and redemptive risk. Modify their moment. Why do I say they're able to modify their moment? It says, even if God doesn't do it, we're still not going to bow down to you. You see what they're saying is that never let your existential crisis undermine your eschatological hope. That the existential crisis is what you're dealing with. Eschatological hope is what will happen in the future as you continue to trust in God. But even if that is a particular modifier, even if I'm not delivered, even if tomorrow never comes, even is an adverb, that is a modifier. It qualifies that which is about to be stable. It does not say eventually when God will. It says even if. It doesn't say only if God will. No, it says even if. In other words, if God does it, I'll shout. If God doesn't do it, I'll still shout. Because I understand that my relationship and my values are not necessarily up for grabs because I'm committed to these values. So even if, and that's what I love about this, that even if God doesn't deliver these young men, they understand that God is still Redeemer and Restorer and Creator and Friend and Peacemaker, that God is still all of these things. But if I may use the black church tradition, they say that Nebuchadnezzar said, well, since you won't bow down, we're going to turn up the furnace 7 times hotter than it's ever been turned before. And in the process of turning up the furnace, one of the soldiers was burned in the process. You missed your shout right there. You see, you got to be careful who you try to burn, because you may end up burning yourself in the process. They turn it up 7 times hotter than before, and there they throw these 3 young men in the furnace. And they think that the men had burned up, and when King Nebuchadnezzar gets the report from the soldier, they say, well, King, we threw in 3. Yes. But now there are 4 in the furnace. Yes. And the 4th one looks like the Son of God. Because God didn't deliver them from the flames. God was just with them in the midst of the flames. And what you need to understand is that God may not wipe out the fires, but God will be with us in the midst of the flames if we are willing to trust and we are willing to fight, if we are willing to stand up. Even if things don't go right tomorrow, we will still stand on our value system. Even if it does not go the way we want it, we shall stand and build a yet to be